You're listening to In the Chair, a podcast for Freemasons in England, the UK and around the world. Find out more at masonicpodcast.com. But first, welcome your host, Robert Bone.
Hello again, and I'm Robert Bone, and many thanks for hitting the download button. You're listening to In the Chair, which is of course a podcast for Freemasons and anyone else interested in finding out about Freemasonry. And I hope you enjoy it. We're up to episode 30 so far. So listen in on this one, and for the show notes are masonicpodcast.com/30. And I hope you have enjoyed the previous 29. We're in for a bit of a treat this time round. We've got a returning guest, a returning visitor, who's been on twice already. And each time he's been on, it's been really interesting conversation. I've learnt things, and I know that you guys listening have also learnt things. I sometimes get comments from some people saying that no matter how much they seem to know about Freemasonry, every time they listen to an episode of this, they always seem to learn something a little bit new, sometimes more than others, but there's always something, even if it's just a bit of a difference between how something's done one place and how that can vary in another lodge somewhere else. So, yeah, we've got Reuben back on, but before we get on to that, talking about sort of questions and learning, the last time on the last episode, and also on the newsletter that I send out, and if you haven't signed up for it, make sure you do. Go on to masonicpodcast.com to sign up for that. But I'd asked about any questions, because I do get questions come through on Twitter. Some people email me questions, and I would want to try to put together a bit of a Q&A episode, or if necessary, if I get a question that's actually got quite a lot of depth to it, to actually try to get a guest on to cover that topic in particular. And I've been having a few things come in, and definitely been raised a few questions that making me think, and I'm trying to put together some shows to cover that. But if you have anything yourself, let me know. Either drop me an email, it's robert@masonicpodcast.com, or through Twitter, it's Masonic Podcast on Twitter. If you go onto the website, masonicpodcast.com, there's also a contact form I've now put on there, and you can sort of write a question in the text box on there. So if you do have any questions, let me know. The great thing is I've been, obviously, there's lots of listeners all around the world that listen to this, and it's great, because although I'm doing this in England, and I was thinking, yeah, I'll probably get quite a few listeners in England, there's actually a whole host which are around the world, especially a big contingent in the States. And what's great is I've been getting questions from different people all around the globe, from America, from Australia, and also obviously in the UK as well. And it's great, because there's some things that I think is quite obvious, maybe, and people wanting to find out a little bit more about how things are done in the UK. And so any sort of questions like that. So if you are what I term an international listener, and you have a question, whether it's about English Freemasonry or just the differences, or maybe you're aware that you may be in your country, or maybe even just your lodge in particular, you do things differently, or there's a reason for it, let me know. Or if you've got any questions, because what might be just a fun little fact for you can actually often be quite interesting for people that are ingrained doing it in a different way. And I know that really drives people forward, is listening to the show and spotting those differences, but then also finding out those things that we've got in common. And sometimes it's just finding out why we do different things. And of course, I'm asking this in assuming that you already are a Freemason. If you're a listener to this who isn't a Freemason at the moment, maybe you're interested, or you just want to find out a little bit more about what Freemasonry is. Also, fire away your questions as well. Let me know, because I'm not just doing this for Freemasons. It's people interested in Freemasonry and finding out more about it. So please let me know any questions you have. As I said, drop me an email, robert@masonicpodcast.com, or it's Masonic Podcast on Twitter, or of course just hop onto the website and fill in the contact form there, and make sure you sign up for the newsletter whilst you're there, because that just goes through a little bit of a summary of things that I've gone through, and also things that might be coming up. And it's a great way for me to communicate directly with you, and for then you to communicate back to me. I want to try to build this as a community. And talking of community, if you're not already, make sure you come onto the Facebook group as well. Try and get some conversations started in there. easiest way to find that is just to go onto masonicpodcast.com/Facebook, and that link will redirect you away from the site onto Facebook, so you can actually find it and then just apply to go on there. But back onto today's show. That's all about future shows, so please get in contact to get those future shows done. But back to today, it is once again Reuben Ayres. Now, Reuben is the Provincial Grand Orator in the Province of Devon, meets down in Exeter. He was first on episode 17 when we was talking about the history of Freemasonry in general, and then come back on episode 27 when we talked about the value of Freemasonry. Those were two great episodes. I recommend you listen to them if you haven't already. Easy way to find them is masonicpodcast.com/17 and also /27. And that's assuming you're not on iTunes or something, and you can read the show notes and listen to them through the website. But please welcome back to In the Chair for the third time, Reuben Ayres, the Provincial Grand Orator from the Province of Devonshire. Please welcome back to In the Chair, Reuben Ayres. Now, Reuben, you've probably heard a couple of times before. He's been on the show first giving a bit of an overview of Freemasonry. That was the Freemasonry 101. And again, recently talking about the value of Freemasonry. And in there, we talked about what people get out of Freemasonry. And I guess it was talking about their own, what myself and what Reuben and what people get sort of personally from Freemasonry. We're going to be taking a little bit of a different tact this time, and we're going to be talking about the history of the ritual itself. So welcome back, Reuben. Many thanks for coming on.
Hi, Rob. Good to hear you.
Good to speak to you again. And just to remind people, Reuben is actually the Provincial Grand Orator from the Province of Devonshire, so meets down in Exeter in Devon.
Yeah, that's right.
And actually, last time, if I recall, we were talking about the value of it, and one of the things that actually come up quite a bit was the value of the ritual and how it went into quite a lot of detail. You could look over it and learn it almost parrot fashion, take away a few basic things, but the more you dug into it and the more you researched it, the more was in there to be taken out of it. And today you wanted to talk a little bit about the history of that ritual. I mean, I must admit, I know nothing of where the ritual comes from. As far as I'm concerned, it comes from a little blue book that's put out by Lewis Masonic. Can you give me a little bit more of an idea of basically the history and what it's all about?
Okay. Well, I'll do my best. It's difficult to be too prescriptive about this because most rituals weren't either written down or certainly weren't published until relatively recent times. And furthermore, there's considerable controversy around the history of the ritual and indeed the history of Freemasonry in general. But if we go back, say, before 1717, before the creation
the unification, was it? Yeah.
I think the majority view is that Freemasonry and its ritual evolved from the operative stonemasons who built the cathedrals and castles in the Middle Ages and the various medieval guilds. And that before 1717, there were operative lodges around those stonemasons. And those lodges acted independently, relatively autonomously, and had their own ritual. Out of which has evolved the ritual that we have now. But there were two important differences back then. One is that the ritual was just 2 degrees, rather than the 3 degrees that we have now. And it was in the form of a catechism, so questions and answers.
And I've actually I've only come across that once actually, and there's another book, I'd say a ritual book, which is the Lectures on Freemasonry. So that's when it's put across as a question and answer session. Because actually David West, who was on I think it was episodes 23 and 24, if I recall off the top of my head, he actually surprised me because he said actually in his researches, and I don't know if this is accurate, but he said when he looked into it, especially going back around the 200-300 years ago, actually the initiations and some of those actually happened outside the lodge.
Yes.
That wasn't actually what actually happened within the lodge, the actual initiation. I think the idea being, well, you cannot go into the lodge until you're a Master Mason. So the actual initiation ceremonies happened outside the actual lodge itself.
Yeah, well, I wasn't aware of that, but quite possibly. Much of this comes from sets of documents called the Old Charges.
Right.
Which were the documents surrounding those operative lodges back in the late 16 and early 1700s.
And when you're saying operative, just to clarify, that's literally, instead of those other Masons who are literally going out with the hammer and stuff doing masonry.
Yeah, that's right.
That is the operative Masons.
Yeah, and they were building cathedrals, castles, and the like in this country and across Europe.
Right.
The trouble with the Old Charges is that you can get copies of those, and you can see ritual in there that is very familiarly Masonic.
Right.
There are lots of sections in there that would be familiar to any Freemason. But the history that's in those charges and their dates as well, their original dates of publication, are pretty unreliable.
Right.
Also, most of them, the ones that we have, are from Scottish and Irish lodges rather than English lodges.
Okay.
So, to know exactly how much came from those and how much of our current ritual evolved from other influences is difficult to know. But it appears they form the foundation, at least, of the ritual that we have now, because it's just so familiar.
And it was, because it used to be passed from... It was literally just was spoken. I think that's why it's called emulation, because you're literally emulating what the other person's doing, pretty much copying.
Yeah, exactly.
And the thing is, you didn't have, because it wasn't written down. And I think we don't know much about the history because minutes weren't taken, or if they were, they weren't kept. It wasn't really until the unification coming up on 300 years ago that things actually, I'd say the admin side of Freemasonry actually got organised by the scheme of things, and because of that, we don't actually. That's why it's sort of hidden in mystery, because it just wasn't written down. And of course, that's the problem we have.
Right.
All lodges, I guess, things morph over time, and you've got different lodges, all not necessarily trying to do it differently. I mean, as we probably joke about it now, well, that's Kennet working or whatever. That every lodge has their own working, but I guess the unification probably unified the ritual workings.
Yes, well, that's certainly true. And before that, even, after 1717, after Premier Grand Lodge, although the rituals weren't written down, there were certainly during the 1700s a number of Masonic exposures, as they were called. And these were publications either by Freemasons or by people that had friends who were Freemasons that purported to give the Masonic ritual in detail.
Okay.
And there was certainly one in 1730, quite famous, called Pritchard's Masonry Dissected. And then there were more from 1760 onwards.
Right.
And similarly in France. And it becomes clear, just reading those exposures, that a very interesting thing was happening to the ritual during the 1700s. And that was that it was evolving from a 2-degree system into a 3-degree system.
Right. Okay. So what degree wasn't there? So did it go, because at the moment you go entered apprentice, fellow craft, and then master mason. Do we know what the 2 degrees were?
No, we don't.
Oh, okay.
We don't. So if you take the original system as A and B,
right,
and our system as 1, 2, and 3,
okay,
what we don't know, or we don't know clearly, is whether A became 1 and 2,
right,
and B became 3,
okay,
or A became 1 and B became 2 and 3, or maybe even A became 1, B became 2, and some new material was brought in to build a third degree, or at least part of it. And certainly those early documents, the charges, don't really make any mention of any Hiramic legend.
Okay.
So the whole Hiram Abiff story doesn't seem to appear in the ritual until the 1700s.
Right. But that
there's debate as to whether it existed somewhere or whether it was an innovation. But it certainly didn't exist as an important part of the ritual.
And I've actually, I don't know how correct this is, but many people refer to Royal Arch chapter as a fourth degree almost, which was between the moderns and the ancients. And that was almost one of the things when unifying was we'll take our 3 degrees and add the fourth separately if you want to do it. So I guess that kind of complicates things matters when looking at the history of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, going towards the end of the 1700s, when Premier Grand Lodge were making various adjustments to the ritual, and eventually there was the creation of the ancient Grand Lodges, as you suggested, around 1751, they really became very much wedded to that aspect of the ritual that's the Royal Arch. And in fact, they called it the root, heart and marrow of Freemasonry. And there was a big disagreement over whether that should stay in or stay out when the 2 Grand Lodges came together.
So I guess, I mean, what we consider as, well, this is the ritual, this is how it's always been, this is how it it should be done, because we often get the people, the ritual's always like this is how it always has been, this is how it should be done. And actually that's just because that's what the latest version is that we're aware of. And to be honest, it could have been 300 years, it could have been completely different, almost I wouldn't say unrecognizable, but possibly the phrases that we used might be there, but in a different structure, in a different framework.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely true. You know, what came out of those first 2 degrees, what was added in, what then got taken out and maybe hived off to Royal Arch, what was hived off to Mark Masonry.
Right.
It could have been very different, I think. And also, when the 2 Grand Lodges came together in 1813, there was a lot of compromise over the unified ritual that came out of that unification.
Right.
But that ritual that kind of crystallized around 1814 to 1816, that ritual was never written down. And although it was approved by what became United Grand Lodge, it was never prescribed or enjoined.
Okay.
Grand Lodge have never said there will only be one ritual.
Right. And I mean, we're still looking back at, that's 200 years ago now. So it's, there's obviously been lots of changing. So if things weren't written down, if things weren't, sort of confirmed and said, this is exactly how it's going to be. And I guess if you're true to the, Masonic sort of, especially the obligation in the first degree, we're saying it shouldn't be written or anything, then if that's true and how that's taken, then there is no real true ritual, then, and no Grand Lodge can actually say you're doing it wrong, because there is no true way to say you actually know what is right in the first place. So I guess it's a paradox there.
I think so. And Grand Lodge, to my reading of things, have really stood back, deliberately so, and many would say very sensibly so, from saying that this is correct ritual and this is incorrect. I mean, there are limits, obviously, to the variations that they'll consider as reasonable, but within certain defined lines. And, we all know we go to different lodges, go to different provinces and see remarkable variation in ritual. And Grand Lodge has never stated that one of those is superior to another.
Yes. Yeah, and I mean, we're not just talking about emulation ritual there. You've obviously got tailors. There's basically they all, I guess, if you look, overall, they're going to be very similar. No matter what sort of workings you do, that the core of it's going to be the same. But where did that core come from? I guess, and who can actually say no? This is the version that is the true version, because from what you're saying, none of those versions probably really are the same as what was actually being worked, I was going to say let alone 300 years, let alone 200 years ago by the seam of it.
I think that's right. And, 200 years back, 1815, when that ritual that crystallized out of the unification of the lodges, that was demonstrated a number of times up at Grand Lodge, and the various lodges all over the country sent their representatives up to see this, to learn it, and then to bring it back to their individual lodges.
And I guess
it's impossible that people are going to remember that precisely.
Yes. And I guess the other thing is we're looking at the time there because, of course, the reason why, English Freemasonry is so spread over, because back then, that was when England or Britain had an empire. So, of course, what was probably happening is that ritual was then being distilled, I guess, in London, but then being then sent out across the empire. And, of course, as the British Empire shrunk back, that ritual stayed in that country, in that particular lodge, that particular country's Grand Lodge. And I guess because it sort of got mixed up, then sent out, that's now, I guess, the version that's sort of stuck, and it's just the way it distilled out of it itself, and spread out. So I guess by that point, once it had literally spread over the four corners of the globe, as the British Empire spread out, it was the point of no return, I guess. And once that had been the version, that's the version pretty much is based on what we've got nowadays.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, there would be variations on that because people are never going to have remembered that perfectly accurately originally. Yes. And also they would have taken it back to lodges that would have had their own individual variations, some of which they'd have been wedded to and perhaps wouldn't be terribly keen on changing. And also things evolve over time, don't they? People forget things, they make little adjustments, some of which are deliberate, some are accidental. So, on a common theme, yes, but with pretty marked variation, actually, which makes for added interest.
Yes, I guess. I mean, I'm currently in the chair myself, and I've been going around, and within a period of a couple of months, I think I must have visited about 20 different installation ceremonies, most of which were actually in Berkshire Province. And considering some of them are in the same Masonic centre and almost the night after each other, it's surprising how what you would imagine would be the same ceremony, the same ritual, is different. And that's just purely from the lodge interpreting it. Oh, I say interpreting it, you know what I mean? It's adjusting it in their ways. I mean, one of the lodges, first thing they do is open in all 3 degrees, close in all 3 degrees, and then they can just resume up and down as the ceremony progresses as required.
Right, I've not seen that.
No, that was, I actually had to, I was either one of the wardens or in a guard that night, and I can't remember which one it was. I've been to a few, and I got the, I did get the heads up beforehand, but even so, it was, literally first thing to do, go in there, before even the minutes of the last metering or anything are read, go in the first, second, third, then close in all of them. But now they've gone up and opened in them, closed in them, they can then jump up and down as required throughout the installation ceremony. Or
right, they must be pretty hot at opening and closing,
or whatever. Yes, I think that's that. Yeah, I think, but that's one of their little things. It's now that's what we've done now. So it was all Sunning Lodge, and it was one of those things where that's the way that they do it, and it means that when people like me go along to it, they're then sat there going, "Oh, this is different. This isn't," and it makes them remember. Now that was back in about November time when I saw that, and I still remember it.
Yes,
and I think lots of other lodges have got their own subtleties. The past master of Kennet Lodge, my lodge that I'm in, last year when he was master, he was of Kennet. He was also a master of Tenby Lodge in Wales, and he had to get dispensation from United Grand Lodge for it. And he said that it was so confusing because we tried to where possible to make the ceremonies match because the meetings were only a week apart, and so he would literally on one Wednesday night he was in Tenby doing a degree ceremony. The next Wednesday night he was in Berkshire doing it, and so obviously instead of trying to learn, we're trying to make them coincide, make his life easier. But he said even so there were so many little differences, so many subtleties, So from the casual observer, it was exactly the same word for word. But to each lodge, if he had done the wrong workings, then everyone would look at him tutting.
Yeah.
And he said in one of them, when he actually counted through, there was about 80 differences. And they were just so little subtle, but you could see how, if there's those little differences, if that then spread to somewhere else, and that spread to somewhere else, how that ritual would evolve over time.
Yes, it's inevitable, isn't it? And it makes for a more interesting environment, I think, when you go visiting lodge to lodge.
Yes, definitely. It's especially if you're going in a different centre, a different province, and that's one of the great things with visiting as well, is you do see it from a different angle, and see that lots of lodges do have their own working and interpretation sometimes of it as well.
Yeah, well, down here in Exeter, we have a thing called Exeter working.
Okay.
And in fact, there are little variations of that.
Right.
And although we're not unique in this regard, we do the full opening and closing of the Board of Installed Masters at the time of the installation. And that's a nice variant to see, actually.
Yes, actually, you're talking about the opening of I didn't realise until I saw it. And again, this is one of the things where I've gone to all these lodges. Greyfriars Lodge immediately stands out because they have the working tools of an installed master.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I've not seen that.
I had not seen that before. And a few people had said to me, I remember it's one of those things where I think someone said to me, oh, Greyfriars, they do that. And you kind of go, oh, yeah, that would be interesting. And it's not until you're there and then they do the working, and someone stands up and says, I now present to you the working tools of an installed master. Suddenly your ears pick up and go, this isn't in my book. I don't think it's actually in the ritual book, but it's something they've got. I know, again, my lodge, Kennet Lodge, we've got, when a new member's made a Master Mason, we present a Masonic Bible to them. Yeah. And we've actually got a little script that the chaplain has. Yeah, he's got a bit of ritual, which is unique to Kennet Lodge. And I know, when installing the IPM, we just, instead of just giving him the collar and saying, here's your collar, is pretty much the standard text. We've got another couple of paragraphs that explain about some of the other stuff on the collar, which is unique to Kennet Lodge.
Right, very nice too.
And it's one of those things where you don't notice it when you're sort of going around, but until you're sort of going through and then you start noticing what you do different and other people do different. At the end of the day, it's pretty much the same as what everyone else does as well.
Yeah, and it's nice to know that if somebody stands up and says, that's incorrect ritual, if that's the ritual your lodge has been doing for 100 years, 150 years, whatever it is, they're just wrong because nobody knows what the original ritual was.
Yeah, well, I was actually just about to ask you, we've discussed all everything sort of maybe from the last 300 years of how it's been adapted, but do we know where it might have actually come from? Who was the very first person, I guess, to say this is Masonic Ritual, this is, we all get together every third Wednesday of the month, and this is what we say? Who come up with that idea?
Yeah, well, there were the demonstrations that I mentioned that people went to and then took them back. And then a while after that, various lodges of instruction were set up. Right. So the first of those, I think, was Stability in 1817, and then Emulation came along in 1823. Right. And that received sanction from United Grand Lodge in 1830. Right. Not that Grand Lodge was saying that's the only form of ritual that anyone should follow, but they did approve of Emulation Lodge of Instruction. But they didn't publish their ritual until around 1870, I think, although there was a prototype version that came out in the late 1830s. So the first published ritual in that sense, I would say, was late 1800s, right? Some 60 years after the two Grand Lodges did the United Grand Lodge did its series of demonstrations. Right. So,
I guess what we could almost look at there to say about, the history of the ritual is, yes, the ritual does have history. We just don't really know what it is.
No, we know, well, we get glimpses of it from the various Masonic exposures. Right. And as I say, there were lots of those. There was Pritchard's Masonry Dissected 1830, then three distinct knocks. There's one called Yarkin and Boaz, right. Masonry Revealed, and on it goes. 20, 30 or more of those during the late 1700s. And they give an insight into the way the ritual was evolving during that time. The trouble is, you don't know how reliable they are.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that as well, actually. Is just because they're exposés, do we know, or could they have been, I'd say, sensationalized or sexed up, so to speak, to make them better to sell? Because, to be honest, I'm guessing when those ones were coming out, the publisher, to be honest, were probably more concerned about making money from book sales than giving a accurate reading of what actually happened in a Masonic lodge.
That's quite likely to be true. I guess, though, also there are some common themes that run through those exposures. Right. And so I suppose if you look at the commonalities within it rather than the more sensational sidelines, they give a reasonably clear idea of the general thrust of the ritual at that time.
Okay.
And that's all we have from that period.
Yeah, if you go to sort of Great Queen Street in London, you've got the library there, and it's all packed full of books, and they all look quite old. So I'm guessing those books are all going to have been written within the last 200 years, and none of them really cast much light on further back than that.
Probably true. I mean, they would certainly have the Masonic exposures there. There were certain manuscript rituals that were written around that time. In terms of published ritual, that's considerably later. So, very difficult.
So I guess it's one of those things. If someone's listening to this and is inspired, there probably is more research to be done on this, actually. And I'm guessing it's if someone fancies themselves as a bit of a historian, a bit of an Indiana Jones character, but doesn't want to do the trips abroad, they can still get on a train, pop down to Great Queen Street, and look through the library there and start doing a few researches themselves, I guess.
Oh, I'm sure there are mountains of documents there that somebody could go through, or teams could go through and find all sorts of new things.
Sort of all tucked away. So I think, it's, from what we're saying there, the ritual is, the history of it. It's almost like the history is there, but the history is yet to be written. And, to really have that foundation and to really look back. And I just have this visions of there's this old dusty manuscript of someone who knew that he shouldn't write it down, going back, maybe 300 years or so ago, and he was told that you shouldn't write it down, but he did, and he hid it away so no one would find out about it. And I'm hoping that it's gathering dust somewhere, and then one day someone's going to find it and find the significance of this thing they've got tucked in a wall of some old, cottage somewhere.
It seems impossible, doesn't it,
yes.
that somebody hasn't done that somewhere.
Exactly. It's just that sort of thing. You think, well, there's got to be one person, and all those, 300 years ago who thought, I know I shouldn't do this, but I just cannot get it. But then saying that back, one of the reasons it probably wasn't written down is because back 300 years ago, people, writing down wasn't, a common skill, shall we say. I don't know
That's
how.
True.
It wasn't, I think, it's, I guess it's just a different skill set people had back then, and you learnt by getting told it and remembering it.
Yeah,
Reuben,
absolutely.
I think we've really covered, quite a lot of the history of the ritual, and it does seem a bit of one of those things. A part of me thinks, well, we've spent all this time talking about the history of the ritual, and we, at the end of the day, don't really know what the history of it is. But I think that's part of the enigma. And, when we're looking at it, there's all those layers of it, and those layers, obviously a foundation's been written by people. They've been adapted. As you said, it's gone from 2 to 3 degree ceremonies, and all those other little layers, all those subtleties have been built in. And I think part of the enigma about it is we don't know who done that and when those bits were added.
No, and it's like looking at history through a bit of a mist, really. You get little glimpses of things here and there. And some of those exposés and written manuscripts, there are some common threads there that almost certainly do reflect what was going on at the time. But it's a bit cloudy, really.
Yeah, and I think that, if anything, that actually adds to it a bit, to be honest. I think that gives it that extra little bit of mystery, so that when people are saying about, the secrets of Masonry and what it's all about, I think it's great because actually all Freemasons can probably put their hand on their heart and actually legitimately say, well, they don't even know all the answers, purely because no one does.
No, I agree. And I think the real secret of Freemasonry is that personal journey that you make, isn't it? Yes.
And I think you're going through it and you're discovering it for yourself. And I think that's one of the main things from it, is you work out and take from that ritual. And I think we said this before, you take from it the bits that you want to take from it. And if you want to go through and study the history of it, then by all means, any listeners out there who want to, make this a bit of a topic, then by all means go out and research it and let me know what your findings are.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, Reuben, I will let you go. Many thanks for coming back on.
Not at all. Delighted.
It's a pleasure. So, to all the listeners, just to remind them that I've been talking to Reuben Ayres, and Reuben is actually a member of St George Lodge that meets in Exeter, and of course he's also the Provincial Grand Orator for the Province of Devonshire as well. So, Reuben, many thanks for coming back onto In the Chair, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Hope so, Rob. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Reuben. Once again, many thanks to Reuben Ayres, the Provincial Grand Orator from the Province of Devonshire and a member of St George Lodge. Many thanks to Reuben for coming on the third time. Now, I've got to say, when we done that interview and I recorded it, it was really interesting. I've just recently listened to it, obviously, just before putting this out again, and there was even things that I didn't pick up the first time round. We go into so much depth, and I'd recommend, if you listen to that, maybe listen to it again. There's such a few little sort of subtleties that are going on there, talking about the ritual. And if you've got any ideas or theories, or maybe you're doing research in it yourself, please let me know. As I said at the beginning of the show, it's masonicpodcast.com. Go onto there or drop me an email, robert@masonicpodcast.com, or through Twitter, and let's try to build up a bit of a community. It's great when we were talking about how things started the same, but then things vary and evolve as they go out into the different provinces, the different lodges, and then spreading around the globe. And that history over 300 years, just how that ritual has changed and adapted. And, just speaking to various people on the show before, when we've had, like Baris Yerman, who was over in Turkey talking about how they do the ritual, and even just so much as up in Scotland, back in episode 5, when Barry was on talking about Scottish Freemasonry, about how those little changes are happening. So if you have changes and there's bits different, or you want to know yourself, any questions, of course, let me know, drop me an email. And of course, the show notes for this episode are on the website. It's masonicpodcast.com/30. We've already got some great bits lined up. Keep your questions coming in. It's those questions that sometimes kick things off, to get things going, and really I've really spawned some great episodes. Or if you want to come on the show yourself, anything useful to share, let me know, get in contact. I want this show to be your show as well. Well, I've been Robert Bone. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'll speak to you again soon, and thanks for listening to In the Chair. Remember, tell your friends about it as well.
Thank you for listening to In the Chair. Visit masonicpodcast.com to see the show notes and in-the-chair.co.uk for more resources to help you get the most out of your Masonic journey. If you enjoyed the show, please let us know by rating and reviewing it on iTunes. And remember to subscribe so you don't miss our next podcast. If you're not already, follow us on Twitter @Masonic Podcast.